about who gets to be the bad guy and what characteristics we want the bad guy to have, think about some characteristics we want the good guy to have.
Someone that looks like us.
Someone that looks just like us. Exactly. Absolutely the place where it's going to start. Whoever that is not going to look foreign, alien. They're going to look so much like us that we're just going to see that similarity immediately and go, oh, I can trust that.
Oh, yeah.
That guy kind of looks like my Uncle Harry. That kind of looks like my Aunt Marjorie. That guy kind of looks like my dad. That guy kind of looks like my brother. She looks like my sister. I hate my sister, but I don't hate my sister. She is the problem child in the family. I'm just going to say that. So whoever's going to play the good guy is going to be someone who looks like us. It's going to be someone who, walking down the street, certainly from the back, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Maybe from the front, there might be some distinctive feature here. Most likely it's going to be the eyes. Okay? The most common variation among species who look nearly just like us, that's different, really different, it's the eyes. Anybody want to take a guess why?
Different sun?
Different suns. That's an excellent example. The way that our eyes have developed on this planet is very specific to this environment. If you grew up on another planet, your eyes would have developed differently. They're not likely to look exactly the same. There's very likely that they would look differently. Maybe a little bigger, maybe a little smaller. Different colors, different textures, different patterns, different things that when you look at them front ways, right in the eye, you're going to go, you're not from here. Because the eyes are going to be distinctively different. And you're going to recognize that right away. But if they otherwise, 10 fingers, 10 toes, arms are the same, fingers are hands are the same, ears are basically the same, mouths are basically the same, they got hair on their head, they're basically the same. That makes it a whole lot easier for us to nod our head and go, oh, all right, those are the good guys. They look kind of like us, we can trust them. And they're going to come along and say, we got some cool stuff for you to help fight the bad guys. We'll help you fight the bad guys. And then there will be phase 2 of the war, which will be, well, phase 1 is we get our asses kicked. People understand that? Phase 1 is we get our asses kicked. Phase 2 is we make a comeback. Anybody ever watch pro wrestling? Or a Godzilla movie? There's a common theme there, right? In both of those theatrics. The good guy gets the crap kicked out of him at first, and then, just when you think it's all over, he makes an amazing comeback. Right? That is the way that professional wrestling has every match, and that is the theme from every Godzilla movie. Right? At first, Godzilla gets his ass kicked, and then he comes back and he stomps the crap out of the other monsters. In a wrestling match, whoever the good guy is gets his crap beat out of him by the bad guys, and just when you think he's going to get tapped out and he's going to get bleed unconscious, he makes a comeback. So phase 1 of this war is we get our asses kicked. Phase 2, we make an amazing comeback. So with the help of our friend who comes in and we get to tag them and they come in the ring and they help us fight, then all of a sudden we get to do better. So once we get through phase 1 and phase 2, then we win, chase off the giant bugs, they fly away, leave somewhere else. And then, what do you think is going to happen at that point? Before that.
Introduction of the reptilians.
Before that. Right? What's the thing that's going to happen immediately after that happens?
Celebration.
Biggest party ever. Biggest party ever. Do you have... Your brains do not have the ability from where you sit right now to understand the scope of how big and badass that party's going to be. So let me talk for just a second about the collective psionic pool, which we all participate in, right? Which is one of the reasons why we want to do this the way we're going to do this, as far as getting everybody to focus on a common enemy. That does something to the psionic pool of the collective consciousness of all of us, so that we focus on one thing that gets everybody together. So when it's all over, you will also have this moment, might last days, weeks, before everyone's done partying. People might just be absolutely like as many maximum days as they can drink in a row before they're like, okay, I'm totally done partying. But it is going to be everybody on the planet with a mindset of celebrating. Just think for a second how fucking cool that's going to be. It is going to be a mental, physical, emotional, spiritual high, which most people have never experienced in their lifetime. And those people who have experienced amazing mental, physical, emotional, spiritual highs in their lifetime, it will still beat that out. Really? Everyone's serotonin levels are going to skyrocket. Everyone's going to be feeling like the most amazing sense of relief and victory that they have ever felt. So we're going to be able to start off our post-war, post-disclosure event on the biggest high note that we ever possibly could. Think about that for just a second. Absorb that for just a second. How cool is that going to be? Whatever you think is the coolest thing that you've ever experienced, it's going to be cooler than that. We will have gone through the most stressful experience as an entire global population that we could possibly go through. Facing life-threatening extinction from an extraterrestrial enemy. And when it's over, when we win, everyone will be so happy, so thrilled, so ready to cooperate and work with each other. Right? See where I'm going with this? How do you think the rebuilding process is going to go?
Very cooperative. Great.
High five after high five after high five after high five. Right? It's just going to be like, dude, high five me. Psh, we survived. We're rebuilding the world. High five me again. Right? People are going to be thrilled. Yes, Melissa?
Sounds like in order to go through all this stuff, that you need a strong population. They're poisoning us with chemtrails, genetically modified foods, and all kinds of things. They're fluoridating our water, chlorinating our water. How, I mean, if they want us to be strong to withstand whatever, or maybe they don't. I don't know, it seems to be a conflict of interest there.
So the question that she's asking is, don't we need a strong population that's not being poisoned from the air and the water and everywhere else to be able to go through that? Yes and no. This is, again, one of the parts about this conversation that makes me personally uncomfortable, which is talking about survival of the fittest. Which is, as a planet, as a civilized species, we haven't undergone a major survival of the fittest event since, whatever the last real plague that we had was, or the real last epidemic, or maybe the cholera epidemic might be the last one we've gone through. Certainly the biggest last one we went through was probably the Black Plague. And so as much as I don't like the idea of necessarily saying that some people gotta live, some people gotta die, there is something to be said for a survival of the fittest event. And part of what this gets to be is a survival of the fittest event. So a lot of people who don't survive the process are people that, in a Darwinian sense, are not fit to survive. And those of us that do survive will have demonstrated that we have better genetics, and that we have stronger spirits and willpower, and rebuilding from that base is going to do us better as a civilization long term than including everybody, including those who are the weakest and most unfit to survive. And I'm not too much of a social Darwinist, which is why this part makes me uncomfortable as a human being, because I don't like the idea of that happening on my planet with my people. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't like it at all. It bothers me on an emotional and a spiritual level. However, on an intellectual level, I understand the benefit of it, and I understand the need of it, and I understand why it's probably just going to have to go that way.
But see, if you're fit, if you're one of the fittest, but you're being fed poison and you're being showered with poison, even when you take a shower, the fluoridated water comes upon you.
And all of that is, again, a test of fitness.
Okay.
So that those who survive that process, who thrive and rise up to strength in that process, are still the more fit to survive. We used to be bombarded by diseases and bacteria in such a way that, I mean, just going back to the Victorian era, right, where people, had large families where most of their children wouldn't make it to 5 years old, right? You could have 20 kids over your lifetime, and more than half of them wouldn't survive because they're being absolutely bathed in bacteria, germs, viruses, and other things that are endangering their lives that could claim them at any time. In fact, I mean, it was not uncommon during the Victorian era for children to not get named until they were 6 or 7 because, why give them a name? They might die, they might not make it. So as much as, and there's a part of me that feels that that's atrocious and abhorrent. And maybe on an emotional, spiritual level it is. But on a natural biological level, it's survival of the fittest. And it did make sure that the weakest genetic samples of humankind didn't survive, and the stronger examples of human genetics did. So I'm not saying we should go back to that, but I am saying that where we're at, a Darwinian survival of the fittest event might just be the thing that we need to ensure our survival into the future. So again, I don't like that. It bothers me a lot that we would have to go through something like that. I could certainly never be the person who's deciding you're unfit, you're fit, you're unfit, you're fit. I mean, there's no way that I could do that personally. But anytime you take a large biological population and you enter them into an incredibly stressful, dangerous, life-threatening situation, a survival of the fittest event is underway. And so people who are not smart enough, not willful enough, not intelligent enough, not driven enough to survive, get away, run to a safe location, already be in a safer location, those people are the most likely to not survive. And we may not like it, but on a dice roll of biological evolution, maybe that's the way it should be. Maybe some of those people shouldn't survive. And again, that makes me very uncomfortable, and I feel very bad saying that, because I think that everyone should have a chance. I'm a firm believer in that. And my reason for believing that is because I'm familiar with extraterrestrial species that are morally and ethically opposed to Darwinian events, because they understand that in a controlled sense, when you have a population that is under a certain amount of control, meaning you don't just have a situation where population growth is on a curve that's out of control for the infrastructure of the civilization to survive, which is what we have. We have a problem with that. But there are other civilizations that manage that. They make sure that's not going to happen. They make sure you're not going to have, spikes in population growth, that you can't have enough infrastructure for the bodies that you have to maintain. And those civilizations understand that genius comes from anywhere. Doesn't necessarily come from an upper class of so-called, better genetics And it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't come from, the working castes or the labor classes. Genius can come from anywhere. And so those civilizations understand that if you give everybody a fair shot, if everybody has a chance, if everybody has a certain equal playing field in which to develop themselves and maximize their potentiality to the world in which they live, you end up with a better civilization. Unfortunately, we can't just flip a switch and go to that, right? If we wanted to say that we wanted to achieve a civilization like that someday, it's going to take some work to get there from where we are. And certainly some things are going to have to change before we could get to that place. So my main reasoning for feeling the way that I do about Darwinian tests is because the most advanced civilizations that I've experienced and had a chance to have contact with don't believe in it because they manage their world in such a way that it's unnecessary. But because we're very bad at managing our world, because we're very bad at managing our civilization and our population, that kind of leaves it up to the laws of nature, as it were, to sort that out. So this is where it just gets unpleasant, which is a Darwinian event of survival of the fittest. And that's just, at a certain level, that's what's going to happen here. Because at some point, we're somewhere like 8.5 billion people right about now. Anybody know where we're at population-wise? We're about 7.2. Okay, we're not quite to 8.5 yet. Okay, 7.2, which is still a lot. Anybody think that we're going to be better off when we get to 9.5? How about 12.5? Anybody think that we're going to love life on planet Earth if we get up to 15 billion? So right now, that curve's not stopping. That curve's just going to keep going and going and going until something happens to interrupt that process. Trust me when I say we would prefer to have that process interrupted in such a way before we get to 12 or 15. Because what we think is becoming completely unmanageable now would be absolutely, totally, and completely unmanageable then. So we don't want that. That's bad. Everybody understand that? Agreed. We don't have to like it, but we understand it?
Yes.
Okay. So where was I? Good guys, bad guys. Okay, they're going to look like us. They're going to be able to speak our languages, right?
Yes.
So if you were with an extraterrestrial species that was going to land in India and be part of the transitionary process, you would be pre-trained to fully speak all the languages of the continent and country of India. That would be your job. So you'd be able to speak fluently the 3 or 4 dialects that you would need to speak for that. If it was your job to come to America, you would speak very good English. If it was your job to go somewhere else, you would speak that language. So they're going to speak our languages very well. They're going to communicate very well. They're going to teach us their languages so we can start to communicate both ways. And then sometime after 4 or 5 years, after victory, after V-Day, after Victory Day, somewhere about 4 or 5 years after that, we're going to start the exchange programs. Would anybody like to get picked for an exchange program where you get to go to another planet for 4 or 5 years, learn everything you can about them, and then come back here and share what you learned with the people here? Anybody think that's cool? Anyone? Anyone? So, let me put it another way. Let's say you have millions of people on planet Earth who qualify for the selection process. And you have millions of people who go away for 4 or 5 years to another planet, to another world, to learn their language, their culture, their understanding of science, mathematics, sociology, engineering, physics. And then 4 or 5 years later, when the program, the first wave of the program ends, millions and millions of terrestrial earthlings come back to our world filled with knowledge and information, and start sharing that into the collective awareness and the collective consciousness. Sound cool?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Think about how advanced our civilization would be 5 years after that.
Oh, yeah.
In less than 20 years from the start point of where we're at, when we start this whole thing on Invasion Day, to Victory Day, to the start of the program of the exchange program, to people coming back from that program, to 5-10 years after people have come back from that program and been able to share all of that information with us. 20 years. Yes, Chris?
Well, in order for that to happen, or if it is happening, isn't the business model or the social structure that really have to improve? If we got technologies like that, we would not make war on each other with the enlightenment that we got from those extraterrestrials. I mean, that you're saying, is that happening now, or is you talking about the future, or you think
On a certain scale, these are things that have been happening for decades, right? We have people who have been contacted by extraterrestrials and learning information from other species and trying to convey that information to our world collectively. However, as most of us know, that does not have wide acceptance. There's a lot of those people who are completely ignored by vast swaths of the population. What I'm talking about is a series of events that by the time we're talking about that time in the future, when you have millions of people who have come back from these exchange programs, everyone will be ready to hear what these people learned, right? There won't be some people going, I don't believe that person ever talked to an alien. That's bullshit, right? It will be a common knowledge point that these people went somewhere, they came back, and they all have information to share.
But not that many people doing it now, you say a few thousand or something.
Right, no, we have a certain number of personnel with the ambassadorial corps that's doing this right now, that is going to other worlds, learning what they can, and then coming back and sharing that information. I would say the maximum number of that number of people right now is less than 10,000. Less than 10,000 people who are doing that right now. But all of that knowledge is classified. It's classified in the Covert Military Space Program, and it's not public access information. I'm talking about a point in the future when people will come back, and every single person who went on an adventure will come back and write a book about their experiences, write a book about everything that they learned, write it up and print it out, and all of a sudden you will have a flood of books on the shelves, or on the internet, ebooks, audiobooks, whatever, that will be about all of these people sharing their experiences of what they learned and what the details of this species and what they know are. Which, coming with that, will be all these other different ways of doing things. All these other different ways of managing society and civilization. For the first time in human history, we will actually have the opportunity as a species to consider all these ways of existing, all these ways of living, all these ways of managing ourselves, our planet, our resources, our economies, in ways that we have never been able to collectively make a choice on. What do you think will be the outcome of that 20 years after that? More exponential growth and quantum leap change that is unlike anything that we've ever seen. So before we even get to the end of the 21st century, we're talking about the ability to absolutely and completely change everything we do, every way in which we do it, and exchange it for ways that work better. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think that's cool?
Cool. Yeah.
Question about that.
Yes, please.
What about right now, we've got what is it, the Council of 300, we've got the dark state, the deep state, we've got the bankers, we've got the Rothschilds, we've got all this stuff, and people say, oh, these people control everything ultimately. And so, does control shift hands? Does that break down as well? Or, I mean, or is it the same people controlling then as now?
You're talking about, so the question is, if we have a limited number of people and groups on the planet today who are, say, managing and in control of things,
Yes?
will that change that? Oh, yeah, of course it will. So many opportunities arise from invasion day, through the war, end of the war, exchange programs, where a lot of those people who are in control, some of them will have given up a little bit about what they think needs to happen. Some of their obsessive need to be in control of things will start to shift and fade, because some of them will just understand it's an inevitability. Like you can't control the world under those circumstances. At some point, democracy is going to win out. And when I say, I mean like real democracy in the sense of where you have a majority of voices within the citizenry of the planet who are saying, no, really, we should do this. We all think, majority of us think we should do this. A majority of us think we should do that. And as we see those true democratic decision-making processes work themselves out, again, we're going to be very far from here when we get there. Very far. Very far. It's not to say that some people won't still want to try and be in control of things that they can control, or certain ideas that they want to be in control of, but the whole point here is that it's going to be next to impossible for people to control things with information like they have been, right? So a lot of that control is through what we accept as real and what we don't accept as real and what we're told is real. We're talking about this post-environment, this post-disclosure environment being one in which so much information will flood the planet that kind of control is going to be impossible. And they'll probably just settle for continuing to be, multi-trillionaire businessmen. And in many cases, they'll try and extend maybe some of that control thinking to some of the colonies that we're going to extend outwards to. They might just go, well, time to give up on trying to control planet Earth. Maybe we can do better off at one of the colonies. And, fine. Let them go try and do it somewhere else and not here. Yes, sir?
Yeah, that outside of that exterior stuff that's happening, will it not be a simultaneous raising of consciousness training for the masses?
So the question is, will that not help us see a raise in consciousness or consciousness training for the masses? And the answer is yes, both of them. So just by getting to acceptance after the invasion, we get to like 85% acceptance, that will cause a shift in total consciousness, right? So there's certain 100th monkey. Everybody know what I'm talking about when I say 100th monkey?
Yes.
Yeah, no?
Yep.
Anybody not understand when I say that? Do you seriously not know the 100th monkey theory, Melissa?
I certainly don't, yes.
Wow, okay, you don't. All right, I can do this super quick. So there was a study with these monkeys that were living on these islands off the coast of Japan. And these anthropologists would show up every day in a boat and drop off a box of potatoes to give to these monkeys. And every day they would observe the monkeys as they would come down to the beach, grab a potato covered with sand, and eat the potato, nom, 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 get sand in their teeth. They observed over time on one particular island in which all these monkeys lived, a adult female who came down to the box of potatoes one day, picked up her potato, apparently tired of eating sand with her potato, went down to the water, washed off her potato, and started to eat her potato sand-free. Over the next couple of weeks, she was seen teaching her mother how to do the same thing. She goes, no, come on, Mom, let's go down to the water, wash off the potato. And then once her mother learned how to wash off the potato, they were both seen showing other members of the group of monkeys that, no, take your potato, come down here, wash it off, eat it, no sand. And then magically, overnight, one morning, when the anthropologist came and dropped off the potatoes on all of these islands to the monkeys, every single monkey on every single island was washing off their potato. Do we understand what happened there?
Yeah.
Collective consciousness got to a critical mass point, which they call the 100th monkey, which isn't an actual the 100th one. It was whatever that magic number was. And once enough of them got it, they all got it.
Right.
So when we get to that 85% acceptance, something will happen. Right? We'll just elevate collective consciousness because we all understand that we're not alone anymore. That will be huge. As we go along that process and understand that we have friends and understand that those friends want to share information with us, and again, as we have these large swaths of the population who again are having this acceptance and understanding, that will cause more of these mass consciousness 100th monkey events to take place, and we will continue to escalate in our collective awareness. Cool?
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, yeah, so there. That's the answer to that question. Any other questions? Preston, I know you have a question.
Yeah. How do you see the phenomenon known as prophecy fitting into what you've been talking about?
How do I see the phenomenon known as prophecy fitting into what I'm talking about?
I have a specific individual in mind that I'm talking about
Okay.
that most people probably have been following, and that is Mark Taylor, the fireman from Orlando, Florida, who prophesied well in advance that Trump would win the election.
So,
Well, prophecy has always been about people who can see possibilities and probabilities in the future. And when the particular possibility or probability that you saw and predicted comes true, then you get labeled prophet, because you managed to get one right. It doesn't mean that other people saw it wrong. It just means that they saw different possibilities or probabilities that didn't actually happen on the timeline that we're on. So prophecy is a funny thing that way. There's never a guarantee, ever. So when someone says they've seen something that's going to happen in the future, there's no guarantee. They might be right. And if they are right, then everyone will applaud them as somehow being a magical prophet, but they're not. They're the same prophet as everyone else, they just happen to get that one right on the timeline.
Actually, I see that as an extension of the 100th monkey.
It's certainly our ability to see through the temporal fabric, to see along temporal timelines. That is a psionic ability, that is an ability of evolution. And so as we evolve in our consciousness as a species, everyone will start to, more and more people will start to have a better, more profound sense of what the future holds or will happen. So, yeah. So you're not totally wrong about that.
So it's a feedback system then that your thoughts then accumulate along a certain timeline that it helps to manifest it?
Your thoughts have the ability to place you or push you onto other timelines based on what you're focusing on. But the ability to see something that's a possible or a probable is still just seeing a possible or a probable. It only becomes actual when it actually happens. Same thing is still true when you're trying to put yourself or focusing to put yourself on a certain timeline. You can focus on that, but it doesn't happen until it actually happens. If that makes sense to anybody. Yes, Christopher.
It's kind of wild, but it was like, I don't know if you've ever considered this or run across that, but what about humor? How would humor change with the population changing, getting more enlightened and stuff? Do you think it would change very much, or humor usually has some sort of truth? I mean,
Question is, will these changes affect humor, what we think is funny. Well, since humor has definitely changed throughout the ages, the same things that somebody thought was funny 100 years ago isn't necessarily the same thing that's funny today. So there is some differences as we evolve and move along on what we see as humorous, what we see as funny. I will also say, though, that among the majority of intergalactic species that we run into, that happens to be one of the greatest constants of life in the universe, which is the ability to see something as funny or to laugh. So almost every species that we encounter can laugh, can find something funny and can have a giggle or a laugh about it. Not the same at all. Not the same as us, not sometimes in the same intensity as other species, but humor or the ability to laugh is one of the biggest constants that we have in all life that we are aware of in the universe that we know.
That's good.
So I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good question.
Good.
Anybody else got a question? Yes, Al.
Yeah, you're talking about a table of people that are deciding whether to go with plan A or plan B, and 60% now.
Yeah.
How many people is that?
I couldn't tell you the exact number. It's classified. Yeah, you're talking about no less than. You're talking about no less than a couple thousand people, and probably more than that. But I would not be able to give the exact numbers on that. So we're talking about. That's why it's not one big table. It's a lot of little tables actually, but it's easier to think of it as one big table.
All right, another question.
Yes.
Is there a short list of bad guys, like the insect species that may be the bad guy? Is there a short list, or has one been selected already?
My understanding, it is a short list still, but we're leaning heavily towards an insectoid species, which is what I still think is where we're going to end up with that. But that's my.
Do they fly?
They do have a winged drone, but most of them, will just scamper about on the ground. Questions?
Yes, obviously what you're talking about is relating to what Trump's doing. I wonder if you can say more about that, and when you present the military view, is this what apparently Trump's doing?
It's actually irrelevant to what Mr. Trump decides to do or not to do. If he decides to cooperate, good for him. If he decides not to cooperate, it won't matter. So it's actually quite irrelevant to which person sits in the executive office, and just whether or not they want to cooperate will be good for them and good for everybody else. And they can make it more complicated if they don't want to cooperate, but it's completely independent of one person making the choice. This is about a lot of people in the world making the choice, and the majority is going to be whatever we go with. So anybody at that table who disagrees, when we get up to like 75 or 80%, it doesn't matter. They're going to get steamrolled by everybody else.
How does this correlate at all to the Georgia Guidestones, taking down the world population and all that stuff?
Not really. The Rosicrucians who put up the Georgia Guidestones, had their own principles that they put up there that they felt were correct. But they're guidestones, not laws, not necessarily written, even though they are etched in stone. They're not permanent or absolute in any kind of a way. They're guiding principles. And we certainly have done some math to show that there are more ideal population numbers and there are more unideal population numbers. But a lot of that really depends on infrastructure. So we can support a lot more people with better infrastructure everywhere. But the truth is, we want a few less people than what we have now for sustainability, because we want to be able to sustain for centuries and centuries, thousands of years into the future, and there's no way that you do that with unchecked population growth. It just doesn't happen. So at some point we have to manage that, we have to bring those numbers down. We don't want to bring them down like some people have suggested, down to 2 or 3 billion. That would destroy the planetary economy. Would destroy it. Would absolutely destroy the economy. Would destroy our solar system economy. Would destroy our ability to produce and manage trade agreements. So, you know, if we reduce the number by that, it would be absolutely destructive to us. But we do want to bring those numbers down. I'm one of those people that is in favor of bringing those numbers down in the most healthy, functional, less traumatic way as possible. But like I said, a certain amount of that, because we don't manage it very well, means that we're faced with Darwinian survival of the fittest events to sort of solve that, which usually are just a certain amount of unpleasant when that happens. So hopefully people will start to understand that if we want to have fewer population checks because of war, famine, pestilence, disease, floods, and fires, then, you know, we want to have a manageable population that we don't have to deal with that so much. Yes, ma'am.
You're talking more biological on both sides. Where does artificial intelligence and stuff, is that gonna be curbed, or is that gonna?
So the question is about artificial intelligence. So I will take this.
Robotics and stuff.
Well, robotics and artificial intelligence are not the same thing. They're totally different. So you can.
Though, I mean,
Well,
stay with one.
robotics is something we're going to see more of in the future, right? We're developing different industries. Movers and shakers have been developing robotic technology for a while now. Again, anyone who really wants to understand that, watch Japan.
Right.
So typically what happens with the major industrial producers in Japan, which is Honda, Yamaha, Sony, the major tech corporations, every year they roll out their latest robot, and then the R&D guys shut the doors and nobody says anything for another year, and they're super, super quiet, and they're incredibly secretive, and then when it comes time to roll out their next thing that they've come up with, they roll that out next year. So they continue to throw out these robotic advancements. I would suggest, like everything, that anytime you have a major tech company that is showing you what it's doing, I can guarantee you that whatever they're working on in their classified military hardware development program is way more advanced than that. So we're seeing a certain amount of what robotic technology is doing based on what these industry personnel bring out and show us every year. But what they're working on behind the scenes in military projects is even way more advanced than that.
How is it with the other species?
The same thing is true with other species.
They have a lot?
There's a lot of robotic technology out in the universe, and most species have some form of robots that are integrated into the world in which they work, and some of them. Every species has their own relationship, has had their own ups and downs with robots, artificial intelligence, so everyone comes up with a certain belief system on what's good or healthy for their society, which can affect, you know, percentages of robots per organic personnel or the involvement of artificial intelligence. But I really want to answer the artificial intelligence question. So artificial intelligence, good or bad? Anybody have an opinion? Are they good or bad?
Bad.
Both. They are neither good nor bad, like automatically. Just like people, right? A person doesn't automatically grow up good or bad. Has a lot to do with what they're taught, a lot to do with what their parental modeling is. Artificial intelligence is the same way. Depending on who raises that intelligence, what they teach that intelligence, what programming they put into that intelligence on what is correct, right, moral, amoral, dictates how that artificial intelligence develops. So artificial intelligence doesn't automatically turn into something bad. Artificial intelligence can be very helpful, and we have some artificial intelligence computers that are brilliant and not evil and don't want to take over the world. But every once in a while, you know, somebody makes one and it wants to take over the world, and they have to wipe its memory or blow it up or shut it down or something like that. But most of the military intelligence agencies that are working on artificial intelligence understand that you work on that in closed systems. So no one has built an artificial intelligence computer that can just plug into the internet and plug into the global grid and take over. They're smart enough to understand to develop them in closed environments so that they can't just take over the world by connecting to the internet and becoming endless.
Do other species believe in kind of the same law type of a deal?
again, it's everyone has their own individual experience. So there are species who are artificial intelligence, right? They evolved that way, and they, at some point, some species. Well, no, I wouldn't even say that. I mean, again, the Borg is like this, sort of dark-sided, of the coin negative example. There are species who are artificial intelligence who are perfectly wonderful and fine, and don't want to dominate the world or take people over, or destroy other people's planets, or assimilate everyone, or go around saying resistance is futile. I mean, there are some artificial intelligence life forms that are perfectly pleasant. So it's something that we have to understand is just as dangerous depending on how you raise a child. Right?
Yes.
I mean, most serial killers aren't born, they're made. Right? Something happened in their upbringing, something happened in their childhood that made them what they are. They weren't just born that way. Even though most psychopaths are born psychopaths, not every psychopath turns into a serial killer. Right? So depending on, how a psychopath or a sociopath might be raised might make all the difference in the world in whether they decide to become, a masked serial killer. So serial killers are made, not born. And evil artificial intelligence is made, not born. So depending on how you make it is going to depend on whether it's good, bad, in the middle, whatever. So, yes, Sue.
How long after the invasion are they going to bring out like the medical technologies, like the med beds and stuff like that?
Again, that could be anywhere from 12, 18 months into the first 3 years. So, which will be towards the end of the war itself is when we'll probably start to see that, either somewhere in the middle or towards the end. But we probably won't see it until somewhere halfway in or towards the end of that.
According to Wikipedia.
Who do I get to smack for that?
Of course. Sophia, artificial intelligence, sorry.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Yes, sir.
So, when you mentioned this think tank that came up with two plans, two
Right.
paths, there's got to be more scenarios that have been considered. It's possible.
No.
Because
There are variations of Plan A and variations of Plan B, but there's no Plan C.
the irony would be thrilling in that they both happen at the same time. Or there's actually a real invasion that occurs unexpectedly during the fake invasion.
That's a contingency that has been thought about. It's why we have a fleet, and why the fleet will be on a special standby, watching the perimeter of the solar system to make sure that no one tries to interlope and take advantage of the hoax event. But there is a contingency possibility of having them both happen at the same time, and that could get really interesting. I'll just say that could get really interesting. It could be very messy and sloppy for a few months, and then it could just all sort of just kind of overnight, all of a sudden sort of be worked out, and drama over. But we'll see. We'll just really have to wait and see how it all works out. So, but I know I've asked that question myself. It's like, isn't there a Plan C? It's like, no Plan C.
I think you are Plan C.
Shh. Hush your mouth.
What do you know about Sophia and the artificial intelligent being who they say, I don't know enough about, I haven't been able to find a lot of information about her, who I heard wants to have a baby and is taking over the dark web and it has infiltrated all of our information systems. Does that sort of technology, does she play into any of this stuff?
To my knowledge, there is not a single artificial intelligence that has woven itself into the internet or the web, dark or otherwise. So, and it certainly is possible that an artificial intelligence would want to have progeny, would want to, see if it could make a child or make something, better than itself. I mean, we do that. So it would not be unheard of for an artificial intelligence to want to think about that or want to create a life form genetically,
But
electronically, or whatever,
Does
otherwise.
that sort of stuff play into future happenings with, insectoids coming over here, with how those things play out, with the people sitting around the tables, determining whether we go to plan A or plan B?
I would consider those things to be unrelated. I mean, there are different variables in the equation to be sorted out, but I don't consider them to be related in any way. So I don't consider that insectoids coming to invade have anything directly to do with artificial intelligence, or that artificial intelligence has anything to do directly with the hoax invasion, but they're variables, you know, on a board that might interplay with one another, but they're not directly related to one another in any way that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Oh, come on. This is your one chance to ask me a question. Okay, go ahead.
Talking about plan A and plan B, you suggested both happening at once. I could think of another scenario where instead of the insectoids, killing lots of people when they invade, they could just intimidate us by hovering over the big cities, with their big spacecraft. By intimidation, there would be a reaction from the world population. Isn't that another scenario?
So the question is, is it a different scenario altogether if they just showed up and intimidated us instead of actually invading? And the answer is no, because that's step one in a chess game in which there's no step two. And so essentially, if you want to keep the chess game going, you have to go 1, 2, 3. You have to continue down that move, or essentially nothing's really going to happen.
Well, the people reacting might just try shooting them, start the war from this end, but they would choose shooting us.
Well, that's certain. Okay, yeah. I mean, there's a number of different ways that it could start out. I mean, is really what you're saying. It's like, does the script have to be that it starts exactly? No. I mean, it could. Yeah, sure. It could be they show up and then some humans, try and bomb them, and they're like, "You bombed us. Now we're going to invade you." And I mean, that could happen. Or they could just show up and land. Or they could show up and make demands. Surrender, in 72 hours or else, and then we could go, no, we'll never surrender. Some people might try and negotiate for surrender, and then 72 hours later happens, and then or else happens. I mean, there's a number of different ways that could all play out specifically. I would say that those are things that are not yet written into stone in the script and could change. And there are things in the script that could change as it's happening. So it's not a script that's going to be, this is the way it's happening. Like, it's a script where it could be like a soap opera right now. We got to totally pull out page 5 and rewrite page 5, and that's going to change page 7, 9, 12, 14. Like, it could be an evolving process based on the different things that happen. Yes, ma'am.
You said earlier something about people being either really very intelligent or not being intelligent. Something about 50.
That's the IQ scale. So 100's the middle, 50% of the population is below that, 50% of the population is above that. So you've just got half the population that's not totally stupid, and the other half of the population that is.
My question is, and it's based on my current opinion, that this hoax is a shit show for me, because it really is still just a deception. My question.
Oh yeah.
This is just an
No disagreement there.
My question is, has it ever occurred to anybody at the round table, instead of creating this show, to start educating people and developing something? There's so much knowledge, there's so much technology out there. Why aren't we going out there and educating people and building them up to a place where you can have them continually remote? I mean, I'm looking at it from that place and just go, people are ignorant and they need knowledge. Why more deception? People are ignorant because of a lot of deception.
That's a fair question, and if for those of you who can't hear, why not, instead of just invade the world, why not educate that other lower 50% so that they're capable of handling the take me to your leader moment? And the simple answer for that is not enough time. We don't have time for that. There isn't enough time that it would take to educate those people for us to get to that point. We're gonna have ecological, economic, social collapse before we would be able to get those people educated. It would take a couple decades, take a generation to do that.
That would be self-defeating for the cabal.
Well, they certainly wouldn't agree to that, yes, either, for sure. And we can get most of them to agree to this plan, so. Again, it's about getting everybody to agree. And if you've got half the group that doesn't want to agree and the other half that does, that's a no-go. You gotta go with a plan that you got 2/3 or 3/4 that agrees, or above.
You mentioned a number of times about the round table that was just referenced again. And, who yays or nays? I mean, you said that the president should, it would be whoever's president at the time should go along with it, would be in their best interest to, but if they don't go along with it, stuff's gonna happen anyhow. So who yays or nays? Who sets all this up? Is it the UN? Is it the military? If it's not the president, I mean, who has that kind of power and that sort of connection with extraterrestrials that they can set up such a thing?
So imagine that when we talk about this table, that every country that participates in, again, let's say we're talking pretty much mostly like the G20 countries, or the top 20 or 30 industrial countries in the world. And that each of those countries has personnel which get to sit at this table. Personnel from each country includes members of the executive, legislative branches, military intelligence personnel, corporate personnel, and what we'll call other groups of personnel who are considered essential to the process. That's from every country. So when you add up all of those people from all of those countries, that's where we get the table. So one executive from one country isn't going to get to say yay or nay to this. It's not how it's going to work. So the majority of those personnel from all of those countries, again, that 2/3, 3/4 of those personnel, they're going to get to decide, whoever they are. And so